Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast, where we help leaders build strong teams. Teams built on empathy, understanding, and trust, where every team member feels valued and contributes at the highest level possible.
Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast. My name is Steve Neesmith.
And I'm Rodney Cox.
And Rodney, our guest on the show today is author, speaker, and podcaster Miranda Carls. Miranda is also a certified people and organizational development coaching consultant. While Miranda serves a wide variety of clients and organizations, she especially enjoys writing and teaching on topics related to the integration of faith and work. Her book, The Word at Work, unpacks 10 biblical principles for Christian professionals. Her writing has been featured on sites like the Gospel Coalition, biblicalleadership.com, and many others. Her weekly podcast features interviews with Christian business leaders and thought leaders all around the faith and work movement. Miranda, thank you for joining us today on the StrongTeams.com podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's just a joy and an honor to get to visit with you both today.
Yeah, and Miranda, let me add my welcome also. We're grateful that you're here, and I can't wait for our audience to spend a little time with you today. So help our listeners first get to know a little bit about you personally, but more your background, your family, your kids, your husband, your church.
Yeah, I'll start with my family. They're very important to me. I am a mom of boys. I'm the only female in our house, except for the dog, if she counts. My husband and I, we have 3 boys in grade school, so we're kind of in the thick of that. We've got ages 10, 8, and 6, and they're just a joy. It's all Legos and dirt and all that good stuff at our house, but we love it, and we live in a wonderful community just outside of St. Louis, where we've attended the same church for over 12 years now, and we really enjoy and appreciate our church family there.
That's wonderful, Mariah. We have some grandbabies over here as well, 3 that almost parallel the same age as your children, but we have a couple of skirts and a shirt. It sounds like all you have is some shirts, right? And
That's right. That's right. I'm all alone in the home.
That's it. You know, I grew up with all boys, right? All my cousins are boys, and my granny and my pawpaw, you know, they didn't know what to call us. Ricky, Rodney, Randy, they get us all mixed up. You know, we all had our names, and it was hysterical. So
yeah, I grew up with just brothers, and my parents ran a lumberyard and hardware store in a small town, so all like male employees. So I feel right at home with all the boys around here. I guess I was made to be a boy mom.
God only gave me daughters. My daughters are 34 and 35 now. It's like I always say he knew that I couldn't handle a little boy. So he gave me some little girls, not for some very strategic reasons, primarily to tame my heart, if you know what I'm saying. So those girls have been an incredible blessing. So take us on your journey and how you got here today. I know that you've worked with nonprofits, from startups to Fortune 500. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I love a good professional journey story. Sometimes I wish I had this story of like a big change, you know, where somebody starts off doing one thing and then they start doing something completely different. But I've really always worked squarely within the lane of people development. My mother would tell you that this is unsurprising. I've always loved people and getting to know all the different quirks about different people. So I went to school to be a school teacher, but I didn't go into that. I went straight into working in the nonprofit space and then into corporate people development. So I've been able to work with a wide variety of organizations through that work. Early in my career, that included a lot of designing and developing employee education programs. And nowadays, I do more individual leadership coaching and then team development work and some consulting around people development. So I do work with clients in corporate settings, and then I get to spend a portion of my time creating content and resources specifically for my fellow Christians who work in some of those secular settings, which is really exciting.
Yeah, Miranda, so can you unpack exactly what this whole term faith at work movement is?
Yeah. You know, I'm sure there are more formal definitions. I know both of you are really familiar with the faith and work movement. Broadly speaking, the term faith and work is often used to describe a loose global network, a movement that seeks to really help Christians see their work as a part of God's purpose for their life rather than something entirely separate. And you'll see that mission come to life in many different ways and through many different organizations and initiatives. I have this analogy that I like to use. So in regard to faith and work, I used to use the term the intersection of faith and work quite a bit. That's kind of common language. I'm sure you've heard that. I think I even had it on my website at some point, and I changed it. I really don't love that phrase because if you think about it, at an intersection, two paths will cross, but just for a moment. And then they continue heading in different directions. And that analogy started to really bother me because that's not what the Christian life should be. So I like to use this other analogy. I might lose some people. It involves a tractor. I grew up in a small farming community. So if it's okay, I'm going to use a tractor analogy.
I love a good analogy. Please proceed.
So in those small towns, have you ever been on like a tiny country road that was so small that it couldn't really accommodate 2 lanes of traffic? Yeah, so if you're in a normal vehicle, you can kind of scooch on over onto the shoulder, and if there's another car coming in the opposite direction. But if there is a big tractor on that road, it's going to take up both lanes. You're going to be late for work following that. There's no way around it. And that big tractor is how our faith should be. Our faith should be so big, so intrusive, so all-encompassing that we can't possibly be traveling down that work road, so to speak, or any other road in life without our faith fully occupying that space. So that, I think, really encompasses the heart of the faith and work movement to me. It's about being equipped to bring our faith to work and surrendering every single second of our days for God to work through that for His glory. So you are a Christian everywhere you go, essentially. You are a Christian there, no matter where there is for you specifically in this moment, no matter where your workplace is, that setting, you bring your faith and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit into that workplace with you. So that's how I like to think of the faith and work movement.
Well said, and I appreciate the word picture. As a old marketing communications guy, I can appreciate a good word picture. Really will help me remember your definition of the faith and work movement, Miranda. Miranda, your latest book is titled The Word at Work. I believe it came out about a year ago or so. What inspired you to write this book?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I don't have a background in vocational ministry. I do consider myself as someone who is working in ministry, as I believe all Christians, we're all called to go and tell the world, but from a vocational sense, I've always worked in secular work environments, and I still do today through the clients that I serve. And as someone who has been a Christian for most of my life, so I grew up in a Christian home, and really from the age of understanding and making that commitment my own, I've been a Christian. So as a Christian who works in a secular work setting, it's something that I've thought about a lot. And I'll tell you, I've gotten it wrong a lot of times. I've felt the need to keep my faith hidden or quiet. I've fallen into that trap of compartmentalizing my faith. I've seen my work as less valuable at times to the kingdom because maybe I was designing an employee development program or coaching people to be more effective in their secular professions. So I don't think I always saw the kingdom value in that. And I've felt all of those things that I think many Christians, probably many listeners, have found themselves thinking or feeling from time to time. And then God slowly just started putting it on my heart through certain situations and interactions, through things I was observing, and started laying the path toward writing the book. And my heart really behind the book is I want it to feel like a peer-to-peer encouragement and also a good challenge and maybe a good kick in the pants to my fellow Christian professionals about how we should show up in the workplace and some biblical principles that we can cling to as we do so.
One of the things that endeared me to your book early on, Miranda, was right at the beginning, you included a lengthy worldview statement, and you rarely see that in a book, even with all the faith books that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
I just appreciated that because it helped me early on kind of, know a little bit more about who you were and where you stand. So why'd you decide to include that? That's a little bit of a bonus content that a lot of publishers would probably pursue, just kind of rather put at the end of the book, if even putting it in there at all.
Yeah, a lot of people comment on that because it's not common, to your point, even in Christian books. And that was an early conversation with the editor. It was a very early edition that I felt pretty strongly about. I love to read, so I consume a lot of books, and I think a lot about content consumption. What we consume matters. We know this. It's why we need to be soaking in God's word daily as our chief source of wisdom. It's why we need to be mindful of every ounce of information that we consume. And that's more challenging today, right? With social media and just where information is coming at us all the time. And I also read a lot of standard secular development books as a leadership coach. I'm sure you guys usually or read a lot of those as well. It's just kind of part of the gig if you're working in people development. And I'm always reading everything through the lens of my biblical worldview. And we all do that. Even people who aren't Christians, they still have a certain lens that they are looking at content through. And so that means with some books, for me, I'll glean some really good practical tips. And then some things go into that little trash bin in my brain because they just don't line up with a biblical worldview. So the worldview statement at the beginning of the book is really meant to be a gift of clarity to the readers. It says, here's what I believe and where I'm coming from, and I want you to know that up front. So similar to like a statement of belief, if you're moving to a new town and finding a new church, it helps to understand where those different churches are coming from and review those belief statements to see if it's a good fit for you.
You know, I really appreciated, Miranda, in your previous statement, you were saying that a lot of times you would be doing certain things inside of an organization and really wondering, does this have kingdom impact, or not even being able to see, you know, the impact that you were having. You know, for the Christians that are listening to this broadcast today and struggling with that same question, does my job really have any kingdom impact? How would you respond to those folks?
Yeah, I think most of us, most Christians have this question no matter what they're doing. We know that we're called to work for the kingdom, so we want to know if what we're doing accomplishes that. And, you know, the knee-jerk reaction, or I guess you could say the feel-good response we might think is best or right, is to just say, of course, your job has kingdom impact. But I actually don't see it as being quite that simple. I believe that the more appropriate answer is something more along the lines of, it depends. It depends on how you show up, or even your job can have kingdom impact. I think that we can do people a disservice when we say that simply just showing up is enough. And I think that's where, honestly, I think that's where we've given the enemy such a foothold in our places of work. We just show up, but then we're really not distinct from our unbelieving coworkers in any way. We compartmentalize. I even use it in the book. I like to use the illustration of like a 12-year-old girl being dropped off at school, and she wants her parents to drop her off at the curb, you know, at least a block away from where she meets up with her friends at the school entrance. She doesn't want to be seen with her parents. And sometimes we act like that 12-year-old girl with our faith and with God. We don't take him into our workplaces. We kind of leave him hanging out on the curb. We go into work, we do our thing, and then we pick him back up we pick our faith back up when we get out of our workplaces at the end of the day. And that is, of course, not how we should approach it. There is an active surrender and some action that needs to take place. So practically speaking, I want to give some practical tips here. This can include a few things. First, it's going to sound really simple, but be a Christian and then act like a Christian. So we miss this a lot. It sounds simple, but we miss it a lot. So don't be afraid to wear the label of Christian. And then after wearing the label of Christian, being comfortable, everyone knowing you're a Christian, then you represent Christ well. So that's making God-honoring decisions, loving people well. And this can be really beautiful because you have, you know, those of you listening in, if you work outside of a church or outside of a ministry, you have an opportunity to perhaps be the only authentic representation of Jesus or of Christianity that your coworkers see. So instead of, say, Janet in accounting, who's an unbeliever, instead of Janet seeing Christians through the lens of what the confident online atheists on Twitter tell her, she gets to think of Steve or of Rodney or of those of you listening in. She has a real human connection with a Christian. And she can think of all of those interactions that she's had with that Christian at work. And the fruits of the Spirit, if we're walking in step with the Spirit, the fruits of the Spirit are going to be evident through those interactions. Even if Janet wouldn't label them as such, she now gets to associate Jesus with love and joy and patience and so on. So you never know how the Spirit might work through that, through just being comfortable, everyone knowing you're a Christian, and then acting like a Christian at work. And then second, don't neglect the spiritual realm and the spiritual battles that are taking place all around us, even in the workplace. I think it's really easy to forget that. As we are at work, we're immersed in, it's going to depend on your workplace, but you're immersed in maybe meetings or spreadsheets or project timelines, all of those really tangible things that we can see and touch. And we are doing a lot in the physical world, but the spiritual world is so active all around us. So pray for the Spirit to guide you through conversations that have kingdom impact. And we also can't forget, as we're talking about this, we can't forget that it's not us. We don't save souls. Only God saves people. And our really humble role in that as Christians is just to surrender over to his will and pray for those opportunities and keep an open eye for those seed planting opportunities while we're at work.
So is that how you would really deal with the believer in the workplace that's kind of antagonistic towards believers in the workplace, or, doesn't necessarily support a Christian perspective? It's just live out your values and live out your Christianity just with everybody that you encounter. It doesn't necessarily include a formal Bible study or, something we might think of how I might live that out inside of a secular organization.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it does show up different ways depending on your workplace, depending on the people around you. Some of you listening in, you might have a lot of fellow Christians in your department, and you guys know that, and maybe you do meet for a Bible study. Others of you might feel like you are literally the only Christian in your entire company. So we're all in different settings. But I guess to answer your question, I'll share a disclaimer first, or maybe even a challenge, because I think we can get in our heads about this. We can overthink it. So people may be far less judgmental of your Christian worldview than you might think. I think it's important for us to stay grounded and realistic. A lot of times our coworkers who are not believers, they just don't understand our faith. It's foreign to them. So think about how you react or think about something that's very foreign and unfamiliar to you. So we need to keep that in mind. That's an important side note. But this is a really very, very real thing. As we are in what is often called post-Christian America, our workplaces are often a reflection of the larger culture. So as culture changes, our workplaces change. And our workplaces are also becoming less accepting of Christian principles. And it catches us off guard, I think, because of the point in time that we're in right now, where in America, Christianity was incredibly mainstream 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it's not as much today. So it does tend to catch us off guard because we're seeing a shift. But biblically, we should expect, as we know, at least some level of persecution as Christians. We are told that we will be hated for his name's sake. We know that the world is not always going to embrace us. We are called to remain steadfast regardless. I always think of Paul when I need a healthy dose of perspective. That's a good place to start. Just think of Paul and everything that he endured to spread the gospel. And then I always feel like, man, tolerating, a snide comment or an eye roll is nothing compared to what others have had to endure for our faith. But we need to expectantly walk into things knowing that we will not always have it easy as we continue walking the Christian life. There will likely be coworkers who make comments or are very closed off to our beliefs, but we are called to stay steadfast. So a few practical things. Maybe I'll share a few situations because I think this shows up differently for different people. So if it's okay, I'll kind of walk through a few different ways this might show up and what you might do about it. Yeah. So first one I hear a lot is just simply feeling alone and isolated. For a lot of people, it's not that anyone's being rude to them or making comments. It's just that they feel alone and isolated in their faith at work. They feel like no one else shares in their beliefs, and that feels isolating. So I would say to that person, seek out fellowship. Whether it's a coworker, I hope you do have a coworker and you guys have a common bond through your faith. But if it's not someone at work, it can be your church small group or a neighbor who works in a similar industry, or maybe joining a local faith and work organization or cohort if your city has one of those. But build community that provides you those opportunities to discuss work scenarios with brothers and sisters. That will help you feel less isolated, feel less alone. And it's so valuable, and it's something that I think we often neglect. We will engage in other spiritual disciplines as we should, like Bible reading and prayer, and we neglect the value of fellowship. So that's what I would say to that person is seek out or create some fellowship time for yourself. If you are let's say your coworkers are questioning you about your beliefs and they're verbally doing that or even ridiculing you a bit. This is where there's opportunity to defend the faith. And maybe defend that sometimes can feel like a harsh word, but it's that go-to Christian apologetics verse in 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you about the hope within you. I'm not getting all the words right, but yet do it with gentleness and respect. So that's kind of the go-to Christian apologetics verse. And keywords there, when someone asks, and do it with gentleness and respect. So what this might look like is maybe you have a coworker, a very well-meaning coworker, but they just say, hey, I love working with you, but honestly, I don't understand that Christianity stuff that you're into. I've never been able to wrap my head around it. There's so much opportunity in that question. If you have something to say, if you have a defense for why you have that hope within you. So I would say if that feels uncomfortable to you, crack open a Christian apologetics book or look up a few articles online. There are a lot of great logical defenses for the Christian faith that sometimes resonate more with a non-believer than a response of because the Bible tells me so. So if you can give them a little bit of there's a great book out called Scribes and Scriptures that unpacks the history of how we got the Bible. And that can resonate really well with someone who's having trouble getting over that hump of believing that the Bible is accurate or reliable. So we could go down a ton of rabbit holes with that topic, but that's just something I wanted to bring up if questions are coming your way from coworkers questioning, how can you believe what you believe?
That is such valuable feedback. We really strive on this podcast and with our content in general, Miranda, to be practical, to be tactical. There's probably been way too much content out there over the last 10, 15 years related to Christianity, the workplace, leadership that has us all thinking very strategically, but isn't helping us much Monday through Friday, if you will, on the ground in the workplace. And so this has all been very valuable, and I appreciate you bringing those scenarios along with you. I know that a lot of people are going to identify with those scenarios, and hopefully, our prayers that it will be helpful to them.
Yeah.
So Miranda, what about an organization that's like hostile towards Christianity? I mean, how would you help our listener in those situations?
Yeah. That is very real for some people, especially in some corporate environments. So if you feel like your work environment is so hostile toward Christianity, outwardly hostile toward it, if you feel like that is making it where you can't walk the Christian life well and remain working there, then there might be a tough decision that needs to be made. Maybe ask God for wisdom. We know that He gives us wisdom when we ask for it. Seek some wise counsel, whether that's having a conversation with your spouse or a brother and sister or your pastor. Get their thoughts on it, and it might be time to consider if it's the right environment for you. I do hear questions from people who say that they're asked to engage in sinful behaviors regularly at work. So maybe that's dishonesty. Maybe reporting isn't quite honest within their organization. Maybe they're facing all sorts of ethical dilemmas that are clashing with their biblical worldview, and that's happening on a regular basis. Other people, let's say you work in a marketing role and you're being asked to create content that supports or celebrates unbiblical ideas. These situations can happen to Christians in the workplaces. And there are many cases where you can be a positive influence. If you are in a leadership position, you can maybe drive toward change or have influence over those things. And we do want to keep the lights burning brightly in the darkness, but we also need to think carefully and not remain in places where our workplace is not allowing us to walk the Christian life or is pulling us into sin. That's something to be very cautious about.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Miranda, in an interview like this, we try and really think through what are some great questions that we can ask you that would draw out kind of your heart and the wisdom that you have for our listeners. But I'm sure we've missed something. Is there anything that you think that you should or would like to share with our listeners? Anything that we've missed that we should have asked you? And if so, how would you respond? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to encourage everyone listening in, whether you work for a church or in a secular setting. If you're listening to this podcast, you are taking seriously the charge to work well, but not only work well, but work in ways that honor the Father. And I just want to share again that you're not alone. We talked about the faith and work movement. We talked about fellowship. You have thousands of brothers and sisters, millions all around the world showing up daily as leaders, as teachers, as nurses, as architects, as restaurant managers, as pastors, as you name it, the list goes on. And Jesus is in all of those places because we are in those places as the church. So let's just all keep fighting the good faith and surrendering each and every day, every minute of every day, and all of the work that we do over to His will. So I just want to, in closing, share that encouragement. But it's been just an absolute joy to speak with you all today.
Our pleasure.
Miranda, where can our listeners find you online?
Well, I quit social media six months ago, and I'm living my best life with that. And so I won't tell you to find me on Twitter or Instagram or any of that anymore. But everything I do, the hub for that is at mirandacarls.com. I write for different outlets on faith and work topics. So joining my email list there is a great way to receive additional faith and work content. And you can find links to my podcast, book, services, everything that I do is right there on the website at mirandacarls.com.
And your podcast is named the same. Is it the same name as your book, The Word at Work? What is the name of your podcast?
It is. Yep. It's called The Word at Work. Mm-hmm.
Once again, you can find her at mirandacarls.com. That's mirandacarls.com. And her book is The Word at Work. Miranda, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And until we meet again, God bless.